From the field to the film room to the war room, we have you covered every step of the way as the road to the draft starts right now. Welcome to the chalkboard, my fellow football nerds, for episode number 53 of Chalk Talk, brought to you by the Painted Lines. I'm your host, Shane Half, and you can follow me on Twitter at @halfandhalf_TPL. I'm joined today by the best co-host in the game. You've seen him on the Tough Cover Pod. It's Mark Henry Jr. You can give him a follow on Twitter at @MarkHenryJr_. Mark, how are you doing this evening?
I'm smiling through the pain as another late Sixers loss. But yeah, this is a big Let Shane Cook episode. # Let Shane Cook. We're going to be talking about the offensive line. And I think this is where Shane is the best draft guy I know, because he really is able to break down these offensive linemen. And he was in on Creed Humphrey and a couple other guys last year. So I'm going to add in a couple factoids here and there. I've got my own top 10. I think O-line is definitely the weak point of my scouting, I would say, and I think it's a strong point for Shane. So it made me happy when we made our rankings independently of each other, and we ended up pretty close. So that made me feel better about my rankings. So let's get into that. If you hear me, if you hear me typing away, it's me typing angrily at James Harden haters online, but whatever.
Yeah. So I was talking to my wife last night, and I referred to something my cat did with the term lateral agility. And she was like, I think you've been watching too much offensive linemen. And I was like, no, but I do still have like 2 more guys to watch tonight. So go paint or something. So it's like ingrained. I'm evaluating my cat's lateral agility. I'm so far down the rabbit hole. Offensive line is one of my favorite positions to watch. It's one of my favorite to evaluate. I feel like a couple of years ago, when I started to really get into like the nuts and bolts of football, moving from being more of a casual fan, I realized that you just can't really see what's happening on TV except in the trenches. And so I just started learning how to do that because I could see it. And for me, it's one of the most fascinating things to watch. It's so all the technique and stuff, but it is one of the harder things to talk about because there's just not a lot of frame of reference for people when you start talking about technique and stuff. So we'll do the best we can today to talk about some of these guys. And at the end of the day, if you don't follow what we're talking about, just trust us. Like Mark said, I was in on Creed Humphrey. I was in on Trey Smith, another guy that the Chiefs got. I loved the Chiefs draft last year. I got some high quality offensive linemen. So this will be our second to last positional ranking before the draft. All we have left after today is cornerback, and then we can get into some big board fights, some full first-round mocks, and, of course, it will all lead into our draft show. We're going to be live on air during the first, second, and third rounds of the draft. Probably nothing for day 3. I am married, and I'd like to stay that way, and I'm going to be pushing it to turn around and do like a 6-hour draft show on a Friday after I do like a 3.5-hour one on a Thursday. But so you'll just have to follow me on Twitter. I'll be on there at @halfandhalf_TPL on day 3, tweeting through all the things that I'm not able to be on the air for. But we're going to dive into it. We are doing this a little different. We are doing our top 10 rankings for offensive line, and we are combining all of these guys together. So offensive tackle and interior offensive line, it's all on the same list. It is a little bit of a struggle when you start comparing across positions because I never know if I always debate with myself, do I want to just evaluate the prospect? Do I want to tie in positional value? Because obviously, your offensive tackles are more valuable than your interior offensive linemen. It's a thing I struggle with my big boards too. So I've tried to do some sort of blend here, and we'll just see how it comes out. So, Mark, do you want to lead us off with your number 10, or do you want me to go first?
You go first.
Okay. My number 10 is, and now I'm going to call this guy an interior offensive lineman. I know for a fact Dibes has him as an offensive tackle. I think Mark does too, but it's Tyler Smith out of Tulsa. Tyler Smith, He was a starting left tackle for Tulsa. I think he is probably going to be a guard in the NFL, though. You might could play him at tackle. I just think he's going to be a better fit at guard with his body type, with some of the things where he has a little bit of struggles out in space. But Smith is a highly hyper aggressive guy. He's got that killer mentality. Like, he doesn't want to block his opponent. He wants to put him on the ground. And that can be a bad thing when he's going up against more technically sound edge rushers, guys that will stay patient, guys that are going to let him get out of control. He likes to lunge. He likes to get hands on you. He likes to try to put you on the ground. That's part of the reason I think you shift this guy into offensive guard. Then he doesn't have to worry with those speed rushers off of the edge. You can just put him in a phone booth. You can let him maul the guy that's right in front of him. So I think it uses his aggressiveness best if you do kick him inside. At offensive tackle, though, he's got decent pass sets. He's got a solid anchor because he's so powerful. He is soft around the edges, though. He tends to lunge at speed rushers. If a guy just tries to keep him at arm's length and go around the horn, he has a hard time running him around the horn. And so that is a concern for him at offensive tackle. Nothing he couldn't work through. But again, I do think he's probably going to be an offensive guard. And again, this goes back to that hyper aggression, but he tends to throw his punches too early. He just so desperately wants to lock onto a guy and put him on the ground. I think this guy's probably only going to work in like a power gap scheme. Or excuse me, he pretty much only has work in a power gap scheme at Tulsa. I think he could probably learn to work in a zone scheme, but that's another thing to pile on to learning a new position, and it wouldn't utilize his aggressiveness. So if I'm a team that's a power running team that needs an offensive guard this year, or maybe I can let him sit a year, I think Tyler Smith could be a great value for you in like the second round.
Yeah, he's a guy I really like, and we'll get to him. He's actually one of the guys that I would probably have more to say on. But my number 10 guy is an offensive tackle. I believe he's a little higher on your list. And offensive tackle Bernard Raymond out of Central Michigan. This guy's an athlete. He's a native of Austria. He was a wide receiver initially when he came to Central Michigan, turned into a tight end, and then eventually turned in to an offensive tackle. Is now 305 pounds, which is pretty funny that he was a wide receiver recently. But
he was 230 when he came to Central Michigan. He's put on 75 pounds.
That's unbelievable. Wow. That's a big weight gain. So this is a guy who, I mean, he's just an absolute athlete, like I said, and his RAS, I believe was a 9.81, which is the 23rd best RAS of any offensive tackle that's ever been tested. So from 1987 to 2002, there's been 1,146 offensive tackles tested, and he graded 23rd best of all time. So that gives you an idea of how good of an athlete this guy really is. There is some concerns though with this guy, and that's why he's 10 for me. He is coming from Central Michigan, so there is obviously some doubts about the level of competition and the pass rushers that he faced, and he is 25 years old. So that is a little bit of a concern when you're talking about a guy who I think that there would be, because you could answer this better. But if you're drafting a 25-year-old, you generally want that guy to be ready to play right away. And coming from Central Michigan, even with how athletic he is, you'd have to imagine that there's some questions there about that, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's 24 right now. He'll turn 25 during his rookie season. But yeah, a guy that's raw like that is on the older end now. It is an offensive tackle. And those guys can play into their upper 30s. So it's not as huge of a deal to me at offensive tackle as it could be at other positions, say quarterback, edge rusher. But it is definitely something to keep an eye on, that he is so old and he is so raw at the position.
Yeah. I think that's definitely something that dragged him down a little bit, as opposed to another offensive tackle from a smaller school that I'll get to a little bit later in my rankings. That is kind of what ended up making the delineation between the two.
All right. And I'm going to talk about Raymond here in just a minute. But first, I'm going to talk about my number 9, which is interior offensive lineman Dylan Parham out of Memphis.
He'd be 11 for me, by the way.
He'd be 11 for you. He was a linebacker and a tight end in high school. He was a sprinter and a jumper for the track team. So he's super athletic. At Memphis, he's spent 2 seasons at left guard, 1 at right tackle, and 1 at right guard. So he's got versatility. He is pretty small, so I think he's likely a center in the NFL, but he's never played there, which could be concerning. I think his best position fit is one he's never played, which is one of the things that's really interesting about watching offensive line tape. Like, I don't sit here and watch other positions and be like, this guy's never played here, but this is where he should play in the NFL. And I do it all the time. I've already done it with both of these guys. The first 2 guys on my list, I would change their position. But Eagles fans are really big into Tyler Linderbaum, the center out of Iowa that we'll be talking about later, as a potential Jason Kelce replacement. Dylan Parham could be a potential Jason Kelce replacement that you could take on day 2. He's got exceptional athleticism. He's the same exact height as Jason Kelce. He had the same exact 40 time at the combine, and he had the same exact broad jump. Like, he's the same type of athlete that Jason Kelce is. One of the biggest concerns with him on tape is that he cannot anchor against a bull rush. His technique is there. Like, he starts to get walked back, and what you're supposed to do is absorb it, and then you're supposed to hop. Get your butt down, get your weight down, you hop, and then you anchor against it. You get under the guy and you lift him up. He does what he's supposed to do. He just doesn't have the weight and the strength to do that, which, again, sounds a lot like Jason Kelce when he came into the league. Parham's got a high IQ. He's got great hand technique. He does a great job positioning his body in the run game to seal off gaps. He just doesn't generate movement. And so this is a guy that I think he's going to transition to center. I think he's going to need a year to do it. I think you need him in a program, in a strength and conditioning program, to gain strength, to gain weight, to learn the new position. I would absolutely love the Eagles taking this guy on day 3 to sit for a year behind Jason Kelce. I've mocked him there for a long time. This is a guy that I really like, and in the right scheme and the right team, I think he could be a really good center for a long time in the league.
Yeah, he's definitely a guy that I would have interest in the 3rd round for the Eagles, or for any team looking for interior offensive line help for the future. And speaking of interior offensive line, a guy that I, again, have a little lower than I think consensus, or that you have him here, but I have Zion Johnson as my number 9 offensive lineman. He's an offensive guard out of Boston College. He is a late bloomer. He started his career at Davidson. People will know that if they're college basketball fans. They were just in the tournament, and Steph Curry went there. So not much of a football school, though. I've never really heard of any draft prospects coming from Davidson. They play in the FCS, but he played left tackle in 2020, moved back inside to play left guard last year. He's way too small to play tackle, probably at 6'3" in the NFL. So I would guess that that's not an option. There are some people who I have seen say he has the athleticism to play tackle, but I think with the length that he has, he's absolutely a guard, and he's got quick hands. And he's also one of just 5 Power 5 guards at 80 plus in terms of his PFF grade against the run and the pass. Shout out to I don't know if you've heard of this guy, at Mr. Crockpot, I think, Dives. No, yeah, I got that stat from Dives. But so Zion Johnson's a guy who a lot of people think is ready to plug and play right away. And another reason to be excited about him is the fact they did a 9.55 RAS. Shane loves that I'm talking about RAS so much. I've been looking it up a little bit more, especially with offensive linemen, because there's so little to go off of in terms of statistics. And you can watch tape until you're blue in the face, and you can read about people until you're blue in the face. But it is nice to have something tangible to look at in terms of the RAS, the relative athletic score. So Zion Johnson's a guy who it seems like is kind of trending towards the 1st round right now.
Yeah, I think he is a guy that definitely has a shot to go late 1st round, and I'm going to talk about him in a minute. But before I do, I'm going to talk about my number 8, which is offensive tackle Bernard Raymond out of Central Michigan. Mark already talked about him. Born in Austria, and he grew up playing soccer. He didn't pick up football until he was 14 when he moved to the United States. Like Mark said, he went to Central Michigan as a 230-pound guy, and he transitioned to offensive tackle after 2 seasons, and he was an 18-game starter at left tackle, and he gained 75 pounds in the process of transitioning. So he's packed on a lot of weight and a lot of muscle. At as he refined his technique and stuff over the last 6 games of this collegiate season, he did not allow a single pressure in his final 6 games. So he's very athletic, which you would expect from a former tight end. He's quick out of his stance. He reacts fast. He has really good lateral mobility, just like my cat, apparently. But he's got silky smooth feet in his pass sets. He is great at running edge rushers around the horn. If you don't know what that is, I mean, you know the pocket, right? I know you know the pocket, our listeners. You know the pocket that they'll draw it on the screen on the TV, the pocket where the quarterback has room to step up. Well, if an edge rusher wants to just keep rushing wide, an offensive lineman is basically just supposed to run him around the horn. It's essentially, imagine the arc of the pocket goes behind the quarterback, and you're just supposed to let him run himself out of the play. And Raymond is really good at doing that, at letting edge rushers just run around like that. Now, his technique is raw. He's only got 18 starts at the position. He doesn't land his punches well, and he does tend to let defenders get into his chest. And so if you were just watching him, not knowing the background, you would be really concerned about that. But with the context that he's only played the position for 2 years, what you see on tape is actually pretty impressive. And now functional constraint is a concern. He struggles to generate power from his legs and to anchor against bull rushes. So, and like Mark said, he's 24. He's going to turn 25. He's raw. I would love to see him drafted somewhere that he can slowly develop. I think if a team takes him and throws him on the field in year 1 against NFL competition, I think he's going to get dominated by power rushers. And I think he's going to settle into some bad habits that would really tank his development. So I like Raymond. I definitely think this is a guy that would benefit from sitting his rookie year and adding some of that strength, learning some of that technique from an offensive line coach in the NFL before he sees the field. So this guy is really contingent on where he goes, the type of player he becomes in the league.
Yeah, the next guy I'm talking about is a guy you talked about already in Tyler Smith, offensive lineman from Tulsa. I don't think that you can really say where this guy's going to be. I think he's got the length to play offensive tackle. I think he can bounce inside too, and that's kind of why I am higher on Tyler Smith than consensus. And he's another guy who does seem to be rising, like Zion Johnson, maybe even towards the back end of that first round. I know Dallas, there's a lot of rumors that they're looking at both of those guys. So Tyler Smith is a guy who he's definitely raw, and there's definitely worries about hand placement and, holding penalties and some things that you definitely have to clean up. If I would want anyone to hire to clean that up, it would be Jeff Stoutland. If I was an Eagles guy looking at this guy on day 2, like I said, he's definitely raw, but he mauls linebackers in space. I mean, he is a scary sight in space when you get him downhill. And there's even some clips out there that look like, the Jason Kelsey clips of last year that everyone was going nuts about with him as a lead blocker. So I think that there's a lot to be excited about with Tyler Smith. There's a lot of athleticism. He had an 8.76 RAS. He ran a 5. In the 40-yard dash, which doesn't, it's a 5.02 in the 40-yard dash, which doesn't sound all that exciting, but it's actually 9.24 in terms of the RAS. So that's an elite 40-yard dash, especially at his size, at 6'4.5", 324 pounds to run that fast. Makes it a little bit different. So this is a guy who I think can definitely translate. He might be a little bit raw, like I said, so maybe this isn't a guy who you want to play right away, but I think, speaking from an Eagles perspective, I think that this is a guy who you draft and he learns behind, say, Amalu and Kelsey and the other offensive linemen and Stoutland. And I think he'd be ready by year 2 or year 3 to be a really, really good offensive lineman.
Yeah, I think the difference in where you have him and where I have him is that I see him much more as an interior guy, which is where that positional part comes into play a little bit for me. Evaluating him just as the player, it sounds like we're about on the same page as where he's at.
Yeah, for sure. And you're probably right that his first crack was probably as an interior lineman. But I do think that, you see it with the way offensive linemen get hurt, and we've seen it in Philadelphia with the ability that some of these guys have to bounce around the line. I think it's incredibly important to have that versatility. So even if it's not maybe his best suited position, I do think it's something that's possible at the next level. So I think that helps him out.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. My number 7 is interior offensive lineman Zion Johnson from Boston College, a guy that Mark already talked about. He was a 0-star recruit. I didn't even know that was a thing. He was a 0-star recruit.
Basically means a walk-on. Basically.
Who started 29 games at Boston College at left guard and left tackle. I think he's an offensive guard in the NFL, but you could try him at offensive tackle or center in a pinch, and I think he could at least do something for you. He is very good against the bull rush. He stonewalls it. And when he is forced to give ground, he's able to drop his weight. Like I talked about, he's able to drop weight and anchor, no problem. He's got tremendous lateral mobility. There's that phrase again. He's good in space, which might lead teams to try him at offensive tackle because he does do really well on an island in space, but I don't think that's going to be his best usage. I think he's going to be best used as a left guard in a zone running scheme. So he can use that lateral mobility to string plays out, to get out on the edge and to seal blocks. He's got a high football IQ. He's got impeccable technique. The one thing I did see as a negative for him is that balance can be an issue for him. Sometimes as defenders come into his chest, he tends to drop his head, which does two things. It gets him off balance and it makes him lose sight of his defender. And so you could get a defender coming into his chest that's able to spin off of him and he'll be off balance. He won't be able to see it coming. So that's one thing I did notice on tape with him, but overall a really clean prospect and a guy that I think can come in and probably play offensive guard at a high level as a rookie.
On the next guy, I agree. I think Zion Johnson's a plug-and-play guy. I think he's a guy who you're drafting and you're expecting to start right away. And I think there's a lot of teams in the back half of that first round or in the top half of the second round who will be looking for that type of guy. So I think Zion Johnson will fit right in somewhere. So the next guy I'm talking about is my number 7 offensive lineman, offensive tackle, Trevor Penning out of Northern Iowa. And this is yet another athletic freak. All the first 4 guys on my list have all kind of been athletic freaks, but he had a 9.96 RAS. So that is 6th all time out of the 1,146 offensive tackles that have ever been measured in terms of athletic scores. He ran a 4.89 at 6'7", 325, which is just unbelievable athleticism. He's a great run blocker, great in space for those reasons with how athletic he is. There are some concerns with his pass blocking and his feet around the edge. So that's something that, maybe he's a bit raw early, and obviously coming from the FCS and being from Northern Iowa, it does concern you a little bit with the level of competition. So I do think that there's a chance that he's a little bit rawer than I think some people are out there are saying. And, the competition definitely does scare me. But besides that, he's a really, really good prospect and a really athletic, clean prospect. If you just put him on Alabama and he had the same tape and the same measurables and the same athleticism, he'd be going in the top 10.
Yeah, Penning is my number 6, so I'll talk about him here too. He was also a 0-star recruit as a tight end, and he gained 100 pounds since he walked on Northern Iowa's campus, which is just insane. He was their starting left tackle for the last 2 seasons, and like Mark said, he's a freak athlete that has tremendous power. Now, sometimes he relies on his upper body strength too much, and he gets sloppy with his lower half. He'll stop moving his feet. He'll lunge, and it gets him off balance. One of the biggest things I saw with him is he has a tendency to draw flags when he's challenged with inside pass rush moves. It's not that he oversets. He just struggles with the technique to mirror interior moves laterally. He's explosive moving forward in the run game, but he's not moving laterally. That's a struggle for him. So that's something to keep an eye on. He does have a very high football IQ. He identifies stunts and twists quickly and reacts appropriately. His head's on a swivel when he's blocking. He's always aware of what's going on. He's got a great anchor in the passing game. He's got good power in the running game. Yeah, he's relatively new to the position. He's a lot more refined than some of the other guys I've talked about that with. I think you can start this guy in year 1 for sure. There's going to be some growing pains, but I think he can come in and be a serviceable starter as a rookie.
Yeah, that's something that I would be a bit concerned about. I don't think you can draft him to be that. I feel, but he's probably going to be with the way this is trending. It seems like he's going to be moving up into that top 20. A guy who I have up next at my number 6, who I don't think anyone has this high really, is Sean Ryan. I don't know if it's Sean Ryan. I don't know. It's Rhyan from UCLA. He's another guy like Tyler Smith. I think that there's a lot of similarities between he and Tyler Smith. And it's funny it depends on how did you have, or I don't know if you did any research on him, but do you think he's an offensive guard or offensive tackle?
I didn't. I did not go as in depth on him, so I'd have to look into him some more and get back to you. I know the versatility was a big. I know he's versatile and can play a little bit of everywhere. I'm not sure exactly where I would stick him in the NFL, though.
Yeah, he's 6'5", 320. So I feel like that's kind of right in that tweener range. Probably even like a little big to be a guard and maybe a little small to be a tackle, but he could probably swing it. If you look at his RAS as a tackle, it's an 8.26, which is pretty good. It's 200th out of 1146. But if you look at it as a guard, it becomes a 9.49. So he's an athletic freak if you make him a guard, and just pretty athletic if he's a tackle. So that'll be an interesting thing to see what happens. And I really do think he can play both places. And he's a guy who he only allowed 1 sack in the last 2 years at UCLA, in which he played a full complement of snaps. And he's only allowed 2 sacks in his 1,100 career snaps at UCLA. So this is a guy who I think that he's a lot like Tyler Smith, but I think he's a cleaner prospect than Tyler Smith is, and he played against a higher level of competition. He was also a 4-star athlete, and he was also a star on UCLA's track and field team. So this is a guy who I think that there's a ton to be excited about. And then if you look at the tape that he put out against Oregon, this guy was mauling Kevon Thibodeau. Like, this guy was handling Kevon Thibodeau. They had to switch Kevon Thibodeau. Like they were moving him around in that game to kind of move him away from Ryan. And when they did that, that's when Thibodeau really started to kind of get loose. If he were to play tackle, he would definitely need to, just refine his technique. There's definitely some raw traits there that would need to get refined. Again, I think that Jeff Stoutland would be a great option to do that. And he plays with a nastiness. Like, if you watch the tape, this guy, and you need a little bit of that in your offensive lineman, this guy's nasty. This guy wants to drive you through the offensive line. There was a play where he kind of, probably too long, honestly, maybe unsportsmanlike or maybe a penalty, but it reminded me of the Blind Side. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie but the play where he keeps pushing him until he like pushes him out over the fence, like over the stadium or whatever. It wasn't quite that far, but yeah, takes him to the bus. But I haven't seen that movie in a long time now that I'm talking about it. But that he had a play that reminded me of that. But he's nasty.
Yeah, but the most important question is, did his teammates come to his birthday party?
Vontae Mack, no matter what, man.
All right, so that is our 10 through 6. So let's recap them here for you. Mark, from 10 to 6, he had Bernard Raymond, number 10, Zion Johnson, 9, Tyler Smith, 8, Trevor Penning, 7, Sean Ryan, 6. I had Tyler Smith, 10, Dylan Parham, 9, Bernard Raymond, 8, Zion Johnson, 7, Trevor Penning, 6. And Dives guys are here. I'll read them off. Bernard Raymond, 10. Daniel Falali. I don't know how you say his name. Falali?
Neither do I, yeah.
Falali sounds fun. 9. Kenyon Green, 8. Tyler Smith, 7. Trevor Penning, 6. And so Dives obviously not here tonight, but he does have a short video up on YouTube of his top 10 linemen, so you can go check that out. Give it a click. So we're on to our top 5. Our top 5, which are actually identical, by the way, although we came to them independently. But before we get there, I got to give the folks a break from the O-line talk for just a second. And I got to ask you, Mark, did you see this story about Treylon Burks and hog hunting? Have you seen this?
No, I haven't.
Oh, my gosh. Okay, so a story came out about Treylon Burks. Let me just read a clip here to you. It's talking about how it says his coach struggled to come up with the proper way to describe Burks. Smart, articulate, someone who cares about his teammates, but the word he kept coming back to was country. He hunts wild boars with his dogs and the whole 9 yards, Pitman said. Yes, you read that correctly. Burks doesn't just fish. He doesn't just hunt deer with a crossbow. he goes out into the woods in search of a wild boar with nothing but his dogs and a knife. Emphatically, Burks explained, "We do not use guns. That takes the fun out of it. Having a knife, it's more of a thrill that you're getting up on a wild boar that could kill you. Honestly, it was just a thrill being out there with your friends and family and having a good time." And then the article goes on to say the average wild boar is about 200 pounds and has tusks. Burks says, "Some people probably consider me crazy, but that's just how I am." So, I don't know. I tweeted that out earlier today, and somebody was like, "I'm pretty sure that that's going to be included in his contract, that he's not allowed to do that." And I was like,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that like when Nick Sirianni has this guy come in on a visit, he's just going to have 2 wild boar in the locker room, and he's going to have a knife, and he's going to give Burks one and be like, "All right, let's see who can take down our boar the fastest," and that's how we're going to lose our head coach. But just insane stuff. That'd be like the weirdest contract holdout ever. It's like, no, I'm not signing that. If I have to give up boar hunting with a knife, I'm just not playing in the NFL.
Sam Pitman is like as Arkansas head coach as you could get. I don't know if you know him very well, but he's just like a fat guy, and his saying when they win, like he gives a big "yes sir." That's the big Sam Pitman thing that he does, and they all do the whoop pig suey around him. But there's a comment from Rufus Rogers here that says, "I'm really surprised to not see Cole Strange on anyone's list." And yeah, he's a really athletic guy from Chattanooga, and I think that's kind of why. I think the Chattanooga aspect of it and the worst competition that he played against aspect of it. And maybe that's unfair. He definitely really, really helped himself in the Senior Bowl in Mobile and at the Combine. And I think he's a guy who's definitely going to hear his name called on day 2. And I think everyone, besides maybe Sean Ryan, that we've talked about, will hear their name called on day 1 or day 2. And there's definitely multiple guys who we won't talk about or haven't talked about that'll probably hear their name called on day 2 as well. But the Chattanooga thing and maybe being a little undersized, but yeah, there's Cole Strange Dibes. I know Mr. Crockpot. He didn't have him on the top 10, but he told us to check him out before we did this video.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you nailed it there. It's the Chattanooga thing. He's lesser known. Some of that I would expect him to go sometime in the mid-late 3rd round, but you never know. I guess once you get into that part of the draft, it's just kind of a crapshoot who's going to go where, who a team really likes.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go on to our top 5. They are the same order here for Mark and I. It's a little different for Dibes, but so we'll just chat about these guys. So our number 5 was offensive guard Kenyon Green out of Texas A&M. Green played every position but center at some point in college, so tremendous versatility, but he's going to project best to be a guard, in my opinion. He is an extremely quick processor who rarely misses an assignment. He's got the high football IQ from playing all the different positions, really well balanced in his pass sets, and he's just methodical is how I would describe him. He always plays under control. He's powerful in the run game. He's got a strong punch to stonewall power rushers. He's got a powerful anchor. He's quick off the line as a run blocker. So he can execute what's called a reach block really well, which is where say he's the right guard and there's a defensive end on his right shoulder, that at the snap, he can reach across that guy. He can get outside that guy and seal him off to the inside. It's a tremendously difficult block to pull off well. And he can do reach blocks really well, which is a big advantage for teams that like to pull guys, those power rushing type schemes. I think the biggest struggle for him was pure speed off of the edge at offensive tackle. When he did play offensive tackle, he struggled with speed rushers, but that's why I think he's going to be an offensive guard. It puts him in a phone booth. It contains that. So that biggest weakness that he has on tape, it's gone when he plays offensive guard. And his hand placement's not the best at times. That can get a little sloppy, but he appears to cover any technical deficiencies with just his brute strength. So I think he would have I think he could be an offensive tackle, but I think he would have a lot of growing pains. Whereas I think he can step in at offensive guard and play at a very high level very early.
Yeah, I mean, Kenyon Green, he's a guy he was a 5-star prospect coming in, and he was not only a 5-star prospect, he was the number 3 offensive lineman in the country as a prospect and a top 15 overall player in the country as a prospect coming into Texas A&M. So Kenyon Green's a guy who I think coming into the season was considered like a top 10 to 15 pick. He definitely hurt himself a little bit at the combine. His RAS was a 5.85, so that's the lowest by a lot of anyone that I've mentioned on my list, and that's a 5.85 at offensive guard, not even at offensive tackle, where he played a lot of his snaps. But there is definitely some versatility to him as well. I think he's scheme versatile. Like, I think you could probably play him in as an offensive guard in just about any scheme. So I think that he's a guy who there's definitely concerns with the athleticism and with some hand placement things, but Kenyon Green is a guy who I think could play right away.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, our number 4 is offensive tackle Charles Cross out of Mississippi State. Mark, you want to take him first?
Yeah, I mean, he played at Mississippi State, which if anyone's familiar with Mississippi State in college, Mike Leach runs an air raid offense, so didn't have to block for a lot of runs in college. And when he did, I do know that there's smarter people than I that evaluate offensive linemen have some concerns about Charles Cross in run protection. Not only that he didn't get to do it very often, but that he didn't look very good when he got the chance to do it. So when you're drafting him, it seems like the teams that are going to look at him are the teams that are very, very pass heavy, I think. And I think if you're a team like Philadelphia or a team like San Francisco, not that they're looking for a tackle or anything, but if you're a zone rushing team that really, really relies on your offensive line to run block, I don't think Charles Cross is the right option for you. But if you're a team like the LA Chargers at 17, I think that's a team that makes a lot of sense for Charles Cross. He's elite at pass protection, and he's huge. I don't have his RAS right in front of me. You might. But he's really athletic. It seems like his athleticism should transfer to the next level. And I believe he was I have it right here, but I believe he was a high. Yeah, he was a 5-star high school prospect. So that's always something that's important with offensive linemen to me, to have the pedigree. It kind of makes me nervous when we were talking about guys like we discussed earlier with the 0-star recruits such as Penning and Zion Johnson and people like that. So that's definitely something that players like Kenyon Green and Charles Cross have a leg up on, that not only did they play in the SEC against the best possible competition, the best possible pass rushers, the best possible defenses, but they were, top 15 prospects coming into their schools.
Yeah, he had an FBS high 1,238 pass blocking snaps in the last 2 seasons at Mississippi State. Despite that high number of pass blocking reps, he didn't give up a single QB hit in 2021, which is just phenomenal. Very refined as a pass blocker, like Mark said. He explodes out of his stance. He runs defenders around the arc. He can anchor against bull rushers. Now, he does give up a lot of ground. So if you decide to bull rush him, you get into his chest, he gives up a lot of ground. But he is able to anchor in time. He's finally able to gather his legs, drop his anchor, and stonewall the guy. Now, the question is, is he going to be able to do that at the NFL level against bigger, heavier, stronger guys? And I think he will. It could be an issue. You would assume he's going to get stronger too. His technique and what he does is good. It's just the strength that's lacking. And I've got a lot of faith that an NFL strength and conditioning coach can do some work with that. Mississippi State uses really wide split. If you never watched a Mississippi State game, if you never watched a Mike Leach game, you need to watch one. It's incredible. Just the
4 verts.
Yeah, the way he bends the rules of football. But he's out here and he's got he's got his offensive guards lining up like where a tackle normally is. And then his tackles are out further than that, just these extremely wide splits. And so you see Cross operate like on a complete island on a down-by-down basis. And he does great. He's got great lateral mobility, very precise with his punches. The issue is as a run blocker. He's really raw there. Shows high effort. He just does not have the run blocking technique. He's going to work best with limited responsibilities in the run game. So like maybe you get in a zone scheme where he's the guy that pulls across and seals the backside, something like that. You don't want this guy in a power running scheme, in a gap scheme. That's not going to work with where he is at currently. Now, I'm going to throw a name out there, and it shouldn't taint this guy or scare you too much, but he's got a lot of similarities to Andre Dillard.
I was thinking the same exact thing. That's funny.
Who also came out of the Mike Leach offense, albeit at Washington State. Both guys, good pass blockers. Both of them struggled with power rushers, and both of them couldn't run block. Now, Cross was a lot higher pedigree athlete than Andre Dillard was, and doesn't have the mental problems. I don't know how to phrase that. That's not, we're not talking about mental illness, the mental fortitude issues that Andre Dillard has. And so that shouldn't scare people off, but just a kind of a comp for people who are listening to us. This is the type of player he is, just a lot better version of it.
So our next guy, we've got Tyler Linderbaum at 3, and it's like, I'll let you kind of, give the accolades and give all the positives. I think it's as simple as saying that he's one of the cleaner prospects in the draft, one of the cleaner prospects that you'll ever evaluate. I don't think any of his negatives have anything to do with anything he does on the football field necessarily. So, like in terms of great run blocker, great pass blocker, great, in space, great athlete, great IQ, great worked with multiple quarterbacks. Like there's, you could say it all. But he is undersized, and there's nothing he can do about that. I mean, that's just what it is. And there's centers that have made it work, and I think he absolutely can make it work. But he's not. If he was a prototypical center, maybe he could even buck the trend of a center going in the top 10. But since he is, even though he is a perfect prospect in terms of on tape and on the field and everything like that, he is undersized, and he is still a center. So it's hard for me to imagine this guy. It seems like this guy has a very hard ceiling on how high he can go. I don't think this guy can go in the top 15. I think he's probably going to end up going in that 15 to 30 range. But, great prospect. Like for all the reasons that I mentioned, it's just a fantastic prospect. But, he's a center and he's a bit undersized. That's really what it comes down to as to why Tyler Linderbaum's not number 1 on this list and not a top 5 prospect in general.
Yeah, this is where it gets hard because I'm going to talk about Creed Humphrey in a second. Tyler Linderbaum is, as I evaluate him, he's the best offensive lineman I evaluate in this class. And so I struggle with where to put him because he's a center, and he's only a center. You cannot put this guy at guard. He's only going to play center in the NFL. And so that naturally makes him less valuable. Now, I evaluated him as better than I did Creed Humphrey last year, but honestly, fairly marginally. I evaluate them super close together. And Creed Humphrey went 63rd overall last year. So this guy's not going in the top 15. I don't know for sure that he's going to be a first-round pick. He should be. He absolutely should be because he's going to be a really good center in the league. But the NFL does not value this position as much. And so I would not be shocked to see him be a day to a second-round pick or a very, very late first-round pick. But we'll get into him here. Like Mark said, he's clean. He was a 3-star defensive line prospect, and he switched to offensive line at Iowa. He had a high school wrestling background, which you hear a lot with offensive linemen. Famously, actually, in high school, he pinned Tristan Wirfs, the offensive tackle for the Bucks. So fun story there. With his size, like Mark said, he's limited to playing center, which limits how high he's going to go in the draft. But make no mistake, he is a very, very talented player. We talk about ceiling and we talk about the floor for guys. This guy's floor is a 10-year starter in the league, in my opinion. This guy's I won't say his floor is all pro, but his floor is at least like a 10-year starter. So you draft this guy, you're as certain as you can be that this guy's not going to be a bust. He's going to be a big contributing member of your football team. It's just at that position. He's got impeccable balance and control of his body. He uses his hands well. He uses his natural leverage well, just like I talked about with Creed Humphrey last year. And a lot of that goes back to that wrestling background. He has elite lateral mobility. He's got great range on stretch zone plays. He can execute those reach blocks that we talked about where you cross the face of the guy and seal him off. Tremendous football IQ. Now, he does have limited reps as a pure pass blocker. Iowa was extremely run and play action pass heavy, but he does have a good pass set. Your concern is going to be him anchoring against big nose tackles, things like that. Honestly, Tyler Linderbaum is very, very comparable to Jason Kelce, except Jason Kelce was a 6th-round pick, and Tyler Linderbaum won't sniff the day 3. He's going to be a really good player for a long time. It's just when a team decides to pull the trigger that the value is good enough to take him.
Yeah, it's going to be one of the more interesting cases to see a value on the draft. And there's a lot of things like that. It's like, where does Devin Lloyd and Kobe Dean go? Where does Jordan Davis go? Where there's a guy like Tyler Linderbaum, even Kyle Hamilton, really, in terms of positional value. So a lot of positional value norms are going to get tested in this year's draft. That's like maybe even like a fun conversation to have on a future episode. But
and a lot of positional norms are starting to be stretched and changed in the NFL.
In general, yeah. Yeah, totally. Our number two guy. Yeah, my bad. Our number 2 guy is Icky Iquanu out of NC State. Icky Iquanu.
Oh, wait. Is Iquanu your number 2?
Yeah.
Oh, he's my number 1. I thought Neal.
Oh, we had it switched.
Okay. Go for it.
Icky Iquanu is my number 2, and not much separates them. Number 1 and number 2 for me. I'll talk about what it is, but he had an 8.31 RAS, so nothing freakish, but definitely very athletic for the position. A lot of Penei Sewell comps I've seen for Icky Iquanu. I think he graded out similarly athletically, and I think that there's some measurables that are pretty similar there. He played guard and tackle. He's a great run blocker. He got in space a lot in an outside zone run scheme at NC State. So he showed what he was able to do in terms of run blocking there. He's a great pass protector, which you wouldn't necessarily think, I guess, at 6'4" as a tackle, but he makes up for his lack of height with really long arms. I haven't seen his wingspan or anything like that, but his wingspan is pretty crazy for an offensive lineman, and that's really what makes up for the lack of height. And that's probably his lack of height is probably why he played guard a little bit in college. I do think he is probably a tackle in the NFL, but like I said before, it always helps to have that versatility to be able to bounce inside if he goes to a place that has a ton of tackles. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. The reason that I had him outside of number 1 is the guy at number 1 is 6'7", 355, and this guy is 6'4", 320. I think that the top 2 on my list are both extremely clean prospects who you said Linderbaum has a floor of being a 10-year starter. I think you can make the same case for Evan Neal and Icky Iquanu. So not much separates them for me here, but I have Iquanu at 2. And the SEC factor as well. Getting the chance to have seen Evan Neal against the best prospects is what leveled him up just a hair.
All right, yeah, I'll go ahead and talk about Iquanu because he's my number 1, and then I'll circle back. So he was a 3-year starter for NC State, mainly played left tackle, but he does have 200 snaps at left guard. Iquanu is a power player. He loves to maul defenders in the running game. He excels at executing combo blocks, which a combo block is where the guard and the tackle both block the same defensive lineman, and then one of them peels off to the second level. He's really good at combo blocks, which is really important in the running game. He's good at hitting defenders on the run in open space. Like they would swing him out on toss plays and on screen plays as a lead blocker. And he's always looking for work out there. He's able to hit those guys on the run and put them on the ground. He can't be bull rushed, but he can sometimes struggle with more slippery finesse type rushers that don't allow him to get his hands on them. Once his hands are on him, it's over. But some of those guys are able to kind of keep his hands off and get around him. I think he would be great in a wide zone running scheme where he can use that lateral mobility to string out to widen those rushing lanes. His calling card is as a run blocker. I would say his weakness is in pass protection, where he sometimes oversets and he allows inside pressure, which oversetting is something a guy like Lane Johnson has done his whole career, and he does it on purpose to tempt guys inside and recovers with his athleticism. I think Iquanu can do that, and maybe that's what he's trying to emulate, but the technique isn't quite there yet. But all that, he only allowed 2 sacks on 820 pass blocking snaps at left tackle this season. So that's versus 67 pancakes and 18 knockdowns. So I say it's a weakness. He did pretty good. Now, it was at NC State, so there is questions there. He's on the smaller side for a tackle, but I think he can play offensive tackle in the NFL just fine. I also think he shouldn't have any problem at all playing offensive guard if he was asked to. Now, where he's going to be drafted, which will be top 5, you're not taking him and asking him to play guard there. But if you take him and tackle doesn't work out for whatever reason, he can slide into guard and he's for sure going to be good there. So Iquanu is my number 1. And then my number 2 is Mark's number 1, and that's Evan Neal out of Alabama.
Yeah, Evan Neal out of Alabama is my number 1. I think he's a top 7 prospect in the draft. Just incredibly clean prospect. 6'7", 337. Played left guard as a freshman, left tackle in 2020, and right tackle in 2021. So it's good to see that he can kind of play all over the line as opposed to a guy we talked about earlier in Andre Dillard. What was the quote about left tackle and right tackle with Dillard again? It's like, oh my God, what was it? It was so stupid.
I can't remember.
It was such a stupid thing to say, but whatever. I was like, oh, it's like learning. I forget how he said it, but it was so stupid. But he was coached by an elite offensive line coach in Doug Marrone, and also obviously by Nick Saban at Alabama, which obviously helps. He was a 3-year starter at Alabama who went to 3 college football playoffs. He was a 5-star high school recruit with tremendous pedigree. He only allowed 1 sack at Alabama in those 3 years to the blitz. He doesn't have an RAS. He didn't test. But Evan Neal, there's an argument that I think Jacksonville should be looking really hard at Evan Neal. I think Evan Neal would be a better pick at number 1 overall than Aiden Hutchinson, even if I think Hutchinson's a slightly better prospect. His career pass blocking grade when removing screens in the quick game was a 78. Which is the highest of any of the offensive tackles that were grading cross, 69.9. Iquanu is actually a 63.3. So I think that Evan Neal is a guy who you could just plug in and play right away. Like I said with Iquanu, I think both of them have a floor of being a very long-term 8 to 10 year starter, like you laid out with Linderbaum. So I think these are 2 guys that are pretty rock solid, sure things at the top.
Yeah, he's got a lot of versatility, too. He started 13 games at left guard, 12 at right tackle, and 14 at left tackle. He's got elite athleticism and strength. And 2021 is when he switched to left tackle, and he struggled at times picking up blitzers, which could be due to a low football IQ. It could be due to learning a new position and the responsibilities with that, which is what I would tend to put it on for a guy with his pedigree. That has played so many positions. I think that's what it is, but I would want to, if I was the team that was going to draft him, I'd want to get him on a whiteboard and talk through a lot of things to check that box and remove that potential concern. He's smooth into his pass sets. He does a really good job of passing off stunts and twists. And, you would expect this at 6'7", 330 plus, but you can't bull rush this guy. Like, he just stonewalls you. He does a great job of sealing defenders out of running lanes. He doesn't – the big negative on him that I saw – not big negative. The biggest negative I saw is he doesn't keep the right contact balance at times. He tends to lean into guys once he's engaged, which can make him a little susceptible to like rip/pull like moves using that weight against him. And so when that happens, he struggles to drop his anchor because of the balance. So speed to power can kind of give him some issues. That's something I think can be cleaned up really easily, though. I think if you're taking Evan Neal or Icky Iquanu with a top 5 pick, you can't go wrong there. I think they're both going to be great players. I think Iquanu is a better run blocker than Neal. I think Neal's a better pass blocker than Iquanu. So it's kind of what flavor do you want?
That's fair. Yeah, no, I think that they're definitely both top 10 to 15 picks. Probably, I mean, top 10. I think they'll both end up going in the top 10. So, I believe we had another a quick draft segment that we wanted to do here with. You wanted to talk about Kevon Thibodeau.
Yeah. Let me throw this up real quick.
Yeah.
Let's recap from 5 to 1. And Mark and I were the same mostly. At 5, we had Kenyon Green. At 4, we had Charles Cross. At 3, we had Tyler Linderbaum. Oh, maybe I just put this in wrong because I've got it right on the graphic. At 2, Icky Iquanu. At 1, Evan Neal. Now I'm really confused. I might have typed that wrong in my notes. Anyways, and Dibes is the same as us with 1 through 4, but he had Zion Johnson at number 5. So there we go. As we wrap up here, and we'll save our RAS score guessing for another one because we're going to run out of time here, but we were going to talk about a couple of guys that are falling, and they just shouldn't be. And one of them is the edge rusher out of Oregon, Kevon Thibodeau. I don't know what's going on with Thibodeau. I watch Thibodeau, and he's got elite traits. And people cite his lack of production. Thibodeau was like the only guy that Oregon had. So you have people saying like, well, it was easy to game plan for Thibodeau. Yeah, because you put your offensive tackle and your offensive guard to double team him and you chipped on him every play because Oregon had nothing else. Like, that doesn't mean a guy's not good. It just means he didn't have – if you put him on Georgia's defense with, Trey Walker and Jordan Davis and all these other guys, Nakobe Dean, all these other guys that are going to be first-round draft picks, he would have racked up the sacks. The biggest thing, though, I feel like people are talking about him falling is because of his personality, the interests off the field. We're getting the whole does he love football thing, and we got that last year with Trevor Lawrence, and I just think it's ridiculous. Like, I don't know. I tweeted this earlier today that somebody was talking about that on Twitter, and I quote tweeted and I said, yeah, my principal told me today that because I have a football podcast, I'm not a very good teacher. It just means I don't love teaching enough. Like, it's a job, it's a game, it's a great job for him to have, but it's a job. And I feel like this guy's being docked for being himself, for having a personality, for having interests outside of the game of football. I think that's part of it. I think part of it too is just like Kevon Thibodeau has been penciled in as like the number 1 pick for like 2 years in this class. And we saw it with Trevor Lawrence last year. Now, ultimately, Trevor Lawrence was a quarterback, so he didn't fall, whereas Thibodeau is not a quarterback, so he might fall. People just get tired of talking about the same guy, and they start to circle back like, well, did I miss something? He can't be that good. There's got to be a hole. I did that watching film on Linderbaum. I was like, this guy's got to have a hole in his game. I must have missed it. And I watched another game. I was like, no, maybe he doesn't. And so I feel like people are doing that with Thibodeau. Whoever gets Thibodeau is getting a steal because this guy should be going number 1 overall in the draft. He is the best edge rusher in this draft. And in a draft that does not have a quarterback that should go number 1, Thibodeau should be the pick. Absolutely.
Yeah, I have another. I could talk about Kyle Hamilton because there's some buzz that he's falling, but it doesn't seem to be as universal as the buzz that Thibodeau or the next guy that I'm going to talk about are falling. But if Kyle Hamilton falls past 5, that's a mistake, and I feel the exact same way that Shane does about Kevon Thibodeau, and echo all the sentiments about the off-the-field stuff and the on-the-field stuff. Thibodeau and Hamilton, to me, are the 2 best prospects in this class, and it's not particularly close. So actually, I shouldn't say that. I think Sauce is right there. I really do think that Hamilton, Thibodeau, and Sauce are very much in a tier alone as the tier 1 of this class to me, even above guys like Evan Neal and above guys like Aiden Hutchinson. So those are 2 guys that I think should not fall. And another guy who I actually have number 5 overall, and it seems like he's now falling to the 20s and maybe even the 30s, is George Karloff, a defensive end from Purdue, who it seemed like at the beginning of this process, at the end of the season, he was a lock for a top 10 pick. It seemed like, the Eagles, we don't even really have to worry about him because he's going to be gone. He went in every mock he ever did in the top 14. And in the last couple months, I don't know what happened because there hasn't been any games that have been played, but he's fallen from top 10 to maybe even not going in the first round. So you ask, he must have graded poorly, right? No, he didn't. He graded phenomenally. His RAS was of course I just had it right here and I lost it. It was a 9.19. George Karloff is an absolute freak in terms of his strength and in terms of his burst. He had a 38 vertical, which is one of the best verticals that was tested at the combine among defensive linemen. George Karloff, there's a buzz on him that he doesn't have the upside that some of these other defensive linemen have, like a Trayvon Walker or like a Devontae Wyatt. And I just, why? Why does he not have that upside? Because he went to Purdue? Like, I don't know what that is. And, I'm not going to make it a white guy thing because I don't think that's what it is. I just truly don't know what the answer is as to why anytime I talk about Karlaftis, it's, oh, he doesn't have the upside, or, oh, he's not a freak athletically. And well, he graded out as a freak athletically, and he is definitely a freak in terms of strength. He wins with strength, and, he doesn't just win against singles with strength. Go watch last year's tape of George Karlaftis from Purdue. He was doubled and tripled every single time. There was not any time, and like you mentioned with Thibodeaux, Oregon didn't have anyone else. Well, Purdue really didn't have anyone else with George Karlaftis. And, there's some people that are mentioning, oh, where's the production from George Karlaftis last year? He still had 5 sacks and 11.5 tackles for losses in 12 games. But if you want production, I mean, he still had 8 QB hits as well. But if you want production, go look at his freshman year as an 18-year-old when he had 12 games for 54 tackles, 17 tackles for loss, 7.5 sacks, 4 QB hits, and 3 passes broken up. That's all you needed to see when he did that as an 18-year-old. This is a guy who's under 21 with an RAS of over 9. Like, I don't understand what the issue is with upside that he doesn't have. He's a young, under 21-year-old who's extremely athletic, who's got the measurables, who's got the tape, who's got the production in his freshman year. I don't get it. This guy should be going in the top 10. And, I hope that the Eagles take advantage of that and take him at 15 or 18, because I think he would fit perfectly on Philadelphia. And he's also got the versatility to bounce inside for some pass rushing snaps as well. So I just think this is the guy that I would bet on 10 times out of 10 being an absolute next level pro at the next level. And, just to wrap it up, Trayvon Walker's a guy who's going to go top 3. George Karlaftis is a guy who might not go in the first round. There's no reason for that gap to me.
Yeah, I had Karlaftis as my edge too when we did our edge rankings.
You did.
Yeah, so I'm very high on Karlaftis. I would be giddy if the Eagles got him. So we'll see what happens with him. We'll see what happens with Kyle Hamilton. I think the big thing for Hamilton is everybody thinks he's a great prospect. There's some people that were raising red flags about his 40 time, but the reality is the NFL is moving to a split field safety sort of look. We're playing quarters, we're playing cover 2, we're playing man match. We're not playing single high anymore. And so why does it doesn't matter if he runs a 4.6 if you're not asking him to play, center field as a free safety. But the guy can do everything. You can put him in the slot and he will body slot receivers. He can man up tight ends. He's a force in the running game. He can do it. Putting that guy on any team would revolutionize their defense from the first day that he steps on the field. And they say it's a safety. Well, safety is becoming increasingly important. And it's going to, I'm not saying it's more important than corner, but people overvalue corner and they sleep on safety because the direction we're moving, these corners are playing underneath and they're protected over the top by safeties. And you need these guys. Know that the only 3 positions that have seen their pay scale rise quicker than safety over the last 10 years is quarterback, offensive tackle, and edge rushers. So safety, NFL teams are valuing it more and more, and it may take a while for drafting to catch up to the trend, but I have no qualms about taking Kyle Hamilton in the top 5. If I was the Jaguars at number 1, if I'm not taking an offensive tackle, I would seriously consider it.
Totally agree. I'm at the point where earlier on in the offseason, I was saying, well, Kyle Hamilton's the best prospect, but I'm going to rank Thibodeaux 1 because he's an edge rusher. I'm at the point where I'm putting that aside and I'm looking at Kyle Hamilton as just a football player, and he's the best football player in the draft. So if I had the first pick in the draft, I would take him. There's not that quarterback there. There's not that offensive lineman there that makes you say, you know what, I can't take a safety. I have to take this for positional value. I would take Kyle Hamilton, and I wouldn't think twice about it.
Yeah, I said I said on the safety podcast, he's the best defensive prospect I've ever evaluated.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't mentioned it yet, but I'm a Notre Dame fan, if you don't know that. So I'm a little biased towards Kyle Hamilton. But I mean this when I say this. Notre Dame, in my life, Kyle Hamilton is the best prospect in Notre Dame in the years that I've followed Notre Dame. And I don't think that there's going to be a better prospect that goes to Notre Dame than Kyle Hamilton. I truly don't think that there will ever be a prospect that I will get to watch at my favorite college that will be as consistently impressive as Kyle Hamilton in terms of the things that he's able to do on the field and the things that he anticipates on the field. I mean, I always go back to that one pick against Florida State, but you can just watch that entire game. And that entire game against Florida State is maybe the most impressive defensive game I've ever seen in terms of a prospect on tape. If you go watch enough tape on YouTube, and you'll get a lot of, a player versus this team, like one game, specific highlights for all of that highlights from that player against that team. Kyle Hamilton versus Florida State, I'd put up against any tape you'll see. I mean, he had 2 picks and the passes broken up, and the things that he was able to do in that game, he completely took it over from a safety position. That's the game that I would point to when people bring up anything about the safety position. That's the game that I point to because he lined up as a linebacker, he lined up as a corner, he lined up as a safety, and he did everything he could to revolutionize that game and basically take over the game from a position where you just don't see guys take over the game other than, like Ed Reed or Darwin James. There's really not that many safeties who take over the game. And, I think Kyle Hamilton's the best safety prospect of all time. That doesn't mean he's the best safety of all time or is going to be the best safety of all time, but you'd be hard pressed to watch the good clips of Kyle Hamilton and not be reminded of some of the things that guys like Ed Reed did. I mean, that's how good this guy is. And that might sound ridiculous to bring up a guy like Ed Reed when talking about a prospect, but he's I brought up names like Peyton Manning when talking about Trevor Lawrence. So I think when you have outlier prospects like Kyle Hamilton, you can make outlier comparisons.
Yeah, for sure. We've got a comment here from Running Back Nightmare that says hello, and then
a lot of Cole Strange love.
Got Cole Strange in the third. Yeah, are these Cole Strange burner accounts? No.
Yeah, a lot of Cole Strange.
I've seen Rufus in the chat before. I haven't seen.
I've seen RB Nightmare's name before.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm on the hunt here. I think we've got a Cole Strange burner account, so we'll see. We'll see if he goes on day 3. Well, I think we've probably talked about offensive line prospects for about half as long as I could, but about twice as long as the people might want to listen. So, Mark, do you got anything else you want to get off your chest before we get out of here?
No. Come listen on Saturday. What day is it? Thursday? Jeez. Come listen on Saturday, 11 to 1 on Fox PHL, the Gambler, streaming live on iHeartRadio. There's a Sixers game at 1 o'clock. It's Masters weekend. Opening day for the Phillies is tomorrow. So there's a ton to talk about. I'm having Austin Krell from the Painted Lines on to talk about the Sixers, talk about that brutal loss tonight, and to preview the game on Saturday at 1 o'clock. And then I'll be talking about some Phillies and some I guess NBA playoffs and Masters with Sean Brace and John Jansen from Fox PHL, the Gambler, who host their own shows on the station. And then once, I think I'm targeting April 23rd as my big tough cover show on Fox PHL, the Gambler, as my big draft preview. We are going to be doing starting next week. There is going to be a draft show on Fox PHL, the Gambler, on iHeartRadio, and I'm sure I'll be asking for Shane's help to come on and guest with me at some point for that. I don't know what that's going to entail yet, but keep it locked to my Twitter at Mark Henry Jr. _ and follow at Fox PHL Gambler while you're at it because there'll be some announcements there. And as always, follow at the Painted Lines for what I'm doing here with Shane. Last night I hopped on a mock draft with Dibes. I should have remembered. I should have brought some of the results from that, and we could have went over that. But I think we're gonna do something very similar on this pod pretty soon, where we all take some teams and play GM a little bit and act like we're what we would do in that situation. So that'll be fun.
Yeah, I'm ready to get into that. I still haven't watched the one from last night. I didn't get to do it yet, but I got to go watch that one. So
it was a fun pod, yeah.
All right. Well, let's get the good listeners out of here. Thank you all for joining us for episode 53 of Chalk Talk. If you enjoy what you heard on the show, check out the feed. We've got rankings for every position except for corner. That'll be where we're at next week. So keep it locked right here. Be sure you smash the subscribe button so you don't miss the next episode. Drop us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps us out. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm at _TPL. Mark is at Mark Henry Jr. Dibes is not here tonight, but he is at Mr. Crockpot. So from me, from Mark, from Dibes, from the Painted Lines, we'll see you guys next time.